So you're listening to the CIP podcast, the Study Abroadcast, Season 5, Episode 10. In this show, we explore the world of study abroad, offering advice, insight, and travel stories, bringing perspectives and cultures along the way. My name is Daniel.
And I'm Jane.
And in this episode, we'll be speaking with two students who went abroad to Singapore about all things related to food. Firstly, would you two like to introduce yourselves to this podcast and tell us a little bit about yourselves and your study abroad experience?
Okay, so hi, my name's Owen. I am in biological science here at the University of Guelph. This is my fourth year, so I'm wrapping up my undergrad this week. I went to exchange in Singapore at the National University of Singapore there, NUS for short. That was in my winter semester of third year. And I went there to do the same studies as I do here. So I was in the science faculty there.
That's very cool. And what about you, Catherine?
Yeah, so my name is Catherine, and I am in my final year of Bachelor of Landscape Architecture here at the university. And similar to, exactly the same as Owen, I also went to the National University of Singapore in the winter semester of my third year. And I chose to apply to the National University of Singapore because I've always been fascinated with this country's history, growth, and culture. And what really drove my decision to pursue an exchange and study abroad here is how essentially creative their approach is to landscape architecture and urban design. So going to this semester, I quickly found that was actually the first BLA that went to the program for exchange. And that means taking design courses. So very similar to the courses I would take in Guelph, and people were surprised by that because it is not a light workload, but I really had the goal to get in and study landscape architecture in a new perspective, and that's what I did, and I would not have done it anywhere else.
That's awesome. That's super cool. And maybe just to give you guys a little bit of context about who we are, my name, as you heard, is Jane, and I actually studied 2 years ago at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, who actually has a really strong department in landscape architecture. So I recently learned a lot about that. So it's super cool to hear that you had that experience there, and I'd love to hear more about that. And yeah, that was a couple years ago, and I'm in my last week of environmental sciences.
And just a little bit about myself. So I'm Daniel, and I went on exchange last semester to Iceland, and I studied in Akureyri, and it was one of the best experiences of my life.
So I was wondering, did you have to adjust your diet while abroad due to the availability and cost of certain foods? If so, what were some of the new foods that you tried or incorporated into your diet?
Yeah, so I'll answer this first. I did have to adjust my diet. I went from, eating back home here, I do eat a variety of food, but there's a decent amount of bread and potatoes and root vegetables and that sort of food. But when we went to Singapore, I had to switch to eating rice basically every day. There was less kind of more starchy vegetables there, so less potatoes, less root vegetables, less bread in general. So one of the biggest switches for me was having to eat a lot more rice and also a lot more leafy vegetables. So a lot of the foods that I ate would either have some sort of leafy vegetable in the food or on the side. And that's something I wasn't used to because back home, that's just not what I eat here. So that was new for me, but I did really enjoy it. It did kind of broaden my whole food palette. I tried a whole lot of different new foods. I got to try stuff that you just cannot really get here. So yeah, I did have to adjust my diet quite a bit, but it was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. During the first week, it was a little rough. Not rough, but just a bit of adjustment during the first week. But after a couple of weeks, I was fully adjusted and used to eating that Southeast Asian diet.
So for me, I am ethnically Chinese. So a lot of the food that I had in Singapore are quite similar to what I eat at home and what I cook for myself, because Singapore has a large majority of Chinese population. But one thing that really just stood out to me was the fact that the fruits there are much more expensive than how much we would pay at home. For example, a pear was around $2, and that is because Singapore is such a small nation where they have to essentially import everything, and with that, it's just everything hikes up the price. But I would say like that was one of the main things, and other than that, it's quite remained the same for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Even kind of when I went to Iceland, I saw that everything was everything was much more expensive and imported, and sometimes I couldn't find like the exact product that would kind of meet my cravings at home. But the next question here for me is, can you describe what your first experience at the grocery store was like? How did you find your experience at the grocery store evolve as you became more culturally adjusted to Singapore? And were there any standout things that were different from what we have in Canada?
I obviously, because I was studying in Sweden, everything was written in Swedish in the grocery store. So that was a bit of an adjustment because I don't speak the language. So one time, actually, the first time I went grocery shopping, I went to go buy yogurt, and instead I almost bought flavored cottage cheese. um, but there is such a thing as Google Translate, so you can like take pictures of like the ingredients or like the list or whatever, and it can translate it for you. So like that was a game changer one. But initially, I was a little bit, I was having like a fun guessing game, like what things were. And I learned how to read Swedish a little bit because of that experience. And another thing that was really interesting about grocery stores in Sweden is that they actually have a taco aisle. So everything you would want for tacos are in an aisle together, which again was a learning curve for me because it's not how things are organized in Canada. But anyways.
That's so funny. My grocery experience was just all Google Translate also.
Yeah, that Kat and I didn't have that experience because in Singapore the national language is English. So all of the like signs and labels, it all has to have English on it for the most part. So well, at least for me, I didn't have that language barrier, which did make going to the grocery store easier. To be honest, Kat and I both did this. We both mainly ate out for all of our meals. We didn't really cook that much because of how affordable it was to eat out at places like hawker centers. So I only went to the grocery store a couple times just to get small things like fruit or snacks to keep in my dorm room. I will say that one main thing is that here you have like your kind of traditional grocery stores, and then in bigger cities you can go to like Chinese grocery stores or more international grocery stores. But from what I saw in Singapore, the layout and what they had was it was basically only like the international grocery stores here, which I thought was pretty neat because I got to see a whole bunch of different like food and snacks that I would never see here. Like in the grocery stores in Singapore, you can get durian, which is something that is basically impossible to get here. But yeah, for the most part, it was pretty similar to grocery stores back here, but there's just a lot more variety of snacks and foods that you could get, more local foods.
Yeah, to kind of add on to that, I remember where we lived in the National University of Singapore student dormitories, there are stoves and cooking appliances, but I don't remember cooking anything during my 4 months in Singapore. We just ate out all the time because it was super affordable. We'll get to that later in the question, but that's kind of almost a reflection of Singaporean culture.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting to hear, kind of coming from me going to Iceland and paying $40 for a burger just to go out to eat, and you eating out like your entire semester abroad. It's so interesting to see like the differences of the countries where we're going to study abroad.
Yeah, Owen mentioned hawker centers, and to give context to those who've never really heard of hawker centers or been to Singapore, essentially there are these huge food marketplace plazas that is very similar to our food courts within the mall, except everything in there ranges from like as low as $2 to $3 to $7 Canadian. So Singaporean dollars is essentially 1-to-1 conversion rate of Canadian dollars. But so that's how affordable everything is, and you would get, I would say, restaurant quality and restaurant grade meals there, and some of them actually are on the Michelin guide. So that was just one thing that was the reason why we could eat out all the time, because a meal would be less than $5. But I will say, for example, if we were to go to a place where we were served or is like a sit down dining, it is pretty similar to the cost that you would experience in Guelph and Toronto and across North America, and tips included. So not everything is affordable. It's just the hawker centers that is local at the different communities that are different school campuses that are affordable. Oh, and I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so all the dining on campus was also similar price. Like I said, like, on average for all the meals that we got that were not in a like sit down restaurant, like Kat was saying, I think on average I probably spent like $5 or $6 per meal, maybe less. And that's all across campus too. So like here at Guelph, we don't have that many food places. Like the UC and Creelman are kind of the two biggest, and then there's just small residence ones. But at NUS, there is so many different food halls. There's so many different sort of hawker centers within campus, and they're all affordable. They're all cheap. It's all really great food. And like a lot of some of the residences also have food. So the residence Kat and I stayed in, PGP, we had our own like PGP canteen hall. We could get food. I know for our breakfast sets, which was eggs, something called kaya toast, which is toast with like a coconut pandan custard spread on it, and coffee was $1.80 Canadian. So eating on campus and off campus was both very affordable. And yeah, like Kat was saying, tip is included. So like here, I'm used to having to pay, an extra like $5 to $10 with tip and tax and all that. But in Singapore and Asia in general, that's not really a thing. So the price you see on the menu is how much you end up paying for. You don't have to like automatically calculate another $10 because of tax and tip.
That's
Hearing-
so cool.
Yeah, hearing that, I think me and Jane going to like the Scandinavian countries and paying like an arm and a leg for any food, I kind of wish that I went to some East Asian country to kind of experience that.
Yeah, like I'm wondering, when you went to the grocery store, like prices, were they similar to Canada? Like, was it cheaper to just eat out, or was it like similar in cost?
It was, like I mentioned before, the fruits were so expensive that I would think I don't need to eat fruit, because I remember buying 2 apples for $5. That, like in Canada, I know it's still quite expensive to buy fresh produce, but 2 apples for $5 really made me think, oh my gosh, I can't afford this. But
Wow.
actually, if you were to get like a cup of apple at our PGP canteen, it was only $2 or $1.75. So I don't know how that works, but it's just like I barely went to the grocery store or supermarkets to buy food. It was more for daily lifestyle items. But yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah.
Were you able to find any foods from home while you were abroad? Like, was there any like comfort food that you were able to like find, or was that something of like interest?
For me, I didn't really have like comfort food cravings per se that much because I just generally like really enjoy the food that was there, the Southeast Asian food. It's one of my kind of favorite genres of food, I guess. So I wasn't really craving stuff from home that much, but if I did, like our residents in their canteen hall, they had like a salad bar. So it was like with like lettuce and egg and meat and like peppers and carrots and stuff like that. So sometimes I would go there if I wanted more fresh produce, but like I was saying, the produce there is more expensive. So that kind of salad bar was, I think, the second most expensive eating area in our little dorm canteen. I think it was normally like $8 for a salad, while all the other food was like $4. But occasionally I did crave an ice cap from Tim's, but thankfully Singapore does have a couple of Tim Hortons in some of the malls. So every time I craved an ice cap, I would go get an ice cap. So that was nice to have. But for the most part, yeah, I adjusted to the foods very quickly, and they were all very, very delicious and very like fulfilling to eat. So I didn't crave food from home that much.
Yeah, Singapore is a very international city, so it has food franchise and everything from all over the world. So if we really craved, like Owen said, an ice cap, we would go to a Tim Hortons in Singapore, though it's much more elevated than what we would usually see at our street intersections. But yeah, I would say I really miss the food or crave food just because we can find so many variety and options in Singapore.
Yeah, like all the food eating areas on campus, the way the stalls there are arranged by like country or type of food. So you'd walk into a dining hall and you'd see like a Western section or a Taiwanese section or a Korean section or a Thai section or a Chinese section. So or an Indian section. So there was so many different types of food available that you never really got bored of, like you never had to eat the same thing over and over again. There's so many different options. So it was not hard to not get bored because there's so many different options.
And it's so interesting to see that you do have so many options. And were the dining halls like open 24/7 so you can go anytime?
It depends on where you live. So, for example, there's dining halls within a residence, and those are usually open during like not public holidays, but like, for example, like a March break equivalent to the NUS. But the ones that usually is like servicing students during classes are closed. But at the same time, there are also community hawker centers and dining halls that is accessible through just public transit. I remember Owen and I, was it during our reading week or I think Chinese New Year where I think everything was closed or it had a very short schedule where we essentially had to either like find food off campus or Uber Eats, but their version is Grab. So
Yeah, it
yeah.
was during Chinese New Year, especially, there was a couple days where basically a lot of the stuff in the city in general was closed. But then especially on campus, like all of the main food halls were closed. So we did kind of have to scrounge around for food. We did have to go out into the city and find what we could find that was open. But yeah, for the most part, the food halls are open most of the day. I think normally they close like around 7 p.m. ish, 7 to 8 p.m. during the week normally, and then on the weekends some of them weren't open. But Monday to Friday they're mainly open from like 7 or 8 a.m. till about 7 or 8 p.m. at night.
It's so interesting to see because I went to Iceland, like I mentioned, like 5 times. But my school was only 2,000 people, and the food hall would be open from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. And that was it Monday through Friday, no Saturdays or Sundays. So it's cool to see how, like a bigger university, you guys have so many more options and stuff to choose from.
Yeah, because a big part of with how many options we had is because with NUS and I think universities in general in Singapore is that most of the students live on campus for their entire degree. So like the hall that I was on, my floor, I was I think the only exchange student, but most of them were in upper year programs already and they had been there for the entire 4 or 5 years that they were at the school. So since there's so many people living on campus all the time, they just have to have more options open.
Yeah, and to just put this into perspective, I remember one of our first exchanger orientation at NUS is they were telling us that they essentially have up to 3,000 exchange students per year at the National University of Singapore. So, and with that, it's not really related to the food or culture, but it's just showing how big of a scale or how many students this university is essentially hosting around the world, just as the exchange proportion.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, Jane. I was just going to add my whole university that had like less than 100 exchange students for the one semester.
Wow. That's like a big discrepancy, eh? That's so interesting.
The next question is, what was your favorite meal that you've had when you were abroad?
For me, I would say either a tie between laksa, which is a type of Southeast Asian like coconut milk based curry. So it's like spicy and it has noodles and all different types of seafood, normally shrimp, and then you can get something called cockles in it, and like bean sprouts and tofu puffs. That was probably my top favorite meal that I've had there, and I've made it back home a couple times. It's not that hard to make. You just have to go to an international grocery store to get some of the ingredients. And then probably another meal that was really great is having chicken rice, which is what Singapore is kind of known for in the food scene. There's chicken rice there's so many different types you can get, or not different types, but so many different places you can get it from. But I think the best I had was on campus in one of the computer science buildings, I believe. I think Kat introduced me to it, but that one was really quite good.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Chicken rice, even though I come from a background where I eat rice and this type of meal kind of on a daily basis, but the chicken rice in Singapore was insane. There's it's so good, and they just do it so well. And there's always kind of an ongoing debate within the different dining halls about who has the best chicken rice. And I agree with Owen. Like, my local friends showed me the one within the computer science complex, and truly, I love chicken rice. I would say chicken rice was my favorite discovery, not discovery, but my favorite meal in Singapore. To add on to that, actually, there's a well-known hawker center. It's called Maxwell Hawker Center. It's right by Chinatown, and it's a very touristy hawker center, but they also serve very good quality food. And one of the main, I would say, attraction or stall within that hawker center, they have probably around 40 different shops, but two of them are Hainanese chicken rice, and they're actually competitors. And actually, when I was there, there was a couple, old Singaporean couple, who told us that one shop took the recipe from another, but then became more famous than the one that had the original recipe. So they told us to support the original developer of that Hainanese chicken rice. And I think it's very valuable to have these conversations with the locals, because they're the ones who have been here for a long time. And this is kind of a cultural exchange. And I loved just striking up conversations like that in hawker centers.
For sure. We were actually wondering what role food plays in socialization in Singapore, and what that kind of looked like. Like, for example, for me, when I studied abroad, in Sweden, there's something called fika, which is like a little like coffee and snack, usually a cinnamon bun break. And it's kind of a time to like eat together, and it's really important for like community bonding and that sort of thing. So you end up drinking a lot of coffee and eating a lot of cinnamon buns. In the best way. So I was wondering if there was like something like that as well, or kind of what that looked like.
Yeah, so since the culture in Singapore, people mainly go out to eat, especially students. That's how you do a lot of your socializing. So every time we would go out to eat on campus, it's always like huge friend groups taking up an entire table, and they're all, eating and sharing food and talking. And yeah, especially for students, especially for exchange students, that's how we met a lot of people, is we just say like, we meet people at an exchange event and say like, hey, do you want to go get food later? Or hey, do you want to go get lunch after class, or do you want to go, downtown and go to a cafe or something? So having that culture of eating out in Singapore and in Southeast Asia and East Asia in general, it's a huge way of how friends like get together and socialize.
Yeah, and to add on to that, on a more like when connecting with the locals as well, like I had group projects with local students, and essentially after class, even if it's not during lunch or dinner or breakfast, they would go, "Do you want to go get food?" And essentially, we just we'll get food and sit there and talk for an extra 1 hour. So it's just a way of kind of, I would say, the same, like you're bonding and you're just talking about things over food, and you're just sharing your culture. And actually, the local students are very curious about what our experience is like outside of Singapore. And I think that's the one of the most valuable parts about going on exchange and studying abroad, is to learn about the local culture and have the locals be just as excited or curious about, say, like Canadian universities.
Yeah, I think to add on to what Kat was saying, that's a kind of a common theme, I would say, for all of the group projects that I had at NUS, because it would typically be me and maybe one other exchange student, paired with some of the local Singaporean students. And as almost every time we met up to do work, it would either we'd get food first or after, and they would try really hard to show us places that you wouldn't find on like TikTok or Instagram or on the internet, to try and find these local spots and introduce us to them. Because one of my classes, it was a religion in Southeast Asia course. So for our group projects, we had to go out in Singapore and find like different religious areas and write about them. So one of the local students in my group had this sort of like hidden jungle temple thing, like over by where he lived. So he took us all. We kind of had to walk through the jungle a little bit, and he brought us to this like hidden little Indonesian temple thing, which is really cool. And he taught us all about the history after. And then after we had kind of done the work for our project, he took us to a local hawker center by his house that wouldn't show up really on Google or TikTok just because it's not like the famous ones, quote unquote, but it's known with the locals. So I got to see a whole bunch of different like smaller little food centers that were not well known, and it was mainly just all locals there, and got to try some new stuff while learning about more about their culture and day-to-day life there. But like Kat said, they would also ask me and the other exchange students a lot of questions like, oh, how is this different from back home, or how's school different from back home? So yeah, being able to eat out like that really did help us bond with the locals and help us learn about each other's cultures.
Sorry, this is a very expanded question, but I think it's also a way that we learn about their culture's etiquette and different things. So in Singapore, it's a very safe country, but there's no but. The but is with a positive connotation. Essentially, there's this word called chop, CHOPE, and essentially is you claiming a seat at a hawker center. So by leaving a water bottle or a pack of tissue or even your bag, and then you go get food. And after you come back with a plate of food, you finish it, and you are required to bring those food back to a station within this food court that essentially like you throw out your garbage and you stack up the plates. And if you don't do that, you could get fined upwards to $200-$500 because essentially you just like making sure that you pick up after yourself. So that's, I think, being with the locals, they also teach us about the etiquette, or just simply, even if you're exploring on your own, you're just observing what people usually do.
Yeah, to even like add on to that, like from my exchange, I think that food brings everyone together, and it kind of is a big part of our day-to-day lives. So like we organized like this international dinner that everyone brought a plate of food from their like home country just so we could all share and kind of experience their culture and their food and stuff like that. So I love sharing food, and my door is like always welcome. I'm like, when I lived in Iceland, I'd always open my door, and if people were just sitting in the kitchen, I'm like, you guys want to try this? And it'd probably be like something simple like tacos or something. But yeah, I always just love sharing. Well, that's our last question. Do you guys have any additional thoughts or anything that you guys think would be beneficial for incoming like exchange students that are going abroad that they should know about like the food situation or something they should be aware of?
I think if you're going on exchange, food is definitely one kind of major thing to consider because, like you said, for you guys, when you went to Europe, it was very expensive to eat out and you had to, buy groceries and cook a lot more. But for Kat and I, we literally never cooked. I think I made ramen like twice, but that's about as much cooking as I did. See, that's something you have to consider when you're planning where you want to go, because maybe you do want to go out and get groceries and cook. That also means you might have to buy like pots and pans and dishes and stuff like that. Whereas Kat and I just kind of showed up. We didn't have to buy anything and we just ate out all the time. And if you want to eat out more of the time, then you also have to like if you go to Europe, it's so expensive. But for Kat and I, we pay on average like $5 or $6 per meal. So when you're considering about like how much your exchange is going to cost, definitely think about the food and the food culture for wherever you're going, because it could have a really big impact on how much you end up spending.
Yeah, I agree with what Owen has said. It's extremely important to manage your budget. I will say I don't know how well both of us did on that, but we came back with full of memories and great memories and a happy stomach. But I would say one thing with going on exchange and essentially discovering or exploring the food scene is I think I'm emphasizing this a lot, is to connect with the local culture and see how the locals and the local students or residents do with their daily like food lifestyle and all that. Because for example, like I know my friends that went to Europe for exchange, like Wales, Vienna, and the Netherlands, they all said they had to cook quite a bit, but at the same time, it was they were getting used to that as part of their everyday life what's that word? Everyday schedule.
Like routine.
Routine, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No
Routine.
worries.
Routine. So it's like this is what they would always buy in. They would kind of prepare sandwich or a meal. So I think I'm digressing, but essentially just learning about the local culture and seeing how you would essentially really adapt to that and try out new things as well.
Oh, also, one other point to consider is if you need like food considerations, like you have a special diet or you're vegan or if you have allergies, that's something that you can get buy-in in Southeast Asia, but it is a bit harder, I would say. I don't have any of those, but some of the friends that were there were like allergic to seafood or peanuts and stuff like that. So, and a lot of the food there has seafood and has peanuts in it. So that's also something to consider is if you do have any restrictions, it might be harder to have access to the foods that you need depending where you go.
Yeah, as well as like gluten sensitivity and lactose. So those things are to keep in mind. I know that two of my friends had pretty not life-threatening but severe nut allergies, and because they wanted to travel across Southeast Asia to places like Thailand, Vietnam, where nuts are pretty fundamental in some of their cooking, the most famous cooking choices. So they would actually learn their food allergy or how to say their food allergy in that local language. So, for, like in Thai or in Vietnamese or in Tagalog, to make sure that they're asking that question before they order. So, like if you're going to a region where English is not widely spoken, I would say that's something to keep in mind if you do have life-threatening allergies or food restrictions and things like that.
That's super helpful. And now I'm super hungry after talking about all of these amazing foods. That is all for today's podcast. Special thanks to our guests, Catherine and Owen, for their insight. For more information on studying abroad, you can head over to our website, uoguelph.ca/CIP, and follow us on Instagram at CIP_Guelph to keep up with all things study abroad. This is actually our last episode of the semester, so we'll be back in the fall. Happy studying abroad!